Hi guys, it's Krista from Sugar Bee Cookies, and we're here to do another cookie decorating tutorial. Today is this adorable spring bird collection with a house, a bird, and some greenery. And these are part of a workshop series that I do in my town, but I also do DIY kits to go along with this video. If you want to visit my website, the link is in the description below. Kits include the cookies, the icing, and any tools and guides that you'll need to make these. You can also make your own cookies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the naked cookies and the shapes. We have the birdhouse, which is honestly just a gingerbread house or a haunted house from a Halloween collection. And I've cut the chimney off before baking. We have a bird, which is a standard little sort of Twitter bird. And this is available in most basic cookie cutter collections for spring. And then I have a leaf. Now you can use any leaf shape, or you could just use an oval or an oblong. We just want the general idea so that we can draw on, or not draw on, pipe on stems and get that greenery on. When you do a workshop or a kit with me, quite often I will do guidelines in an edible marker. This is 100% edible. It's just food coloring essentially. And I'll pre-do the guides so that people know where they're piping, because all my tutorials are beginner friendly format, even if they're a more difficult collection. Tips and tricks: just use round cookie cutters or little shapes that you can find to create anything that you need. The kits also will include any tools that you need. So in this case, we're going to use a paintbrush because we're going to paint on anything that's white in the backgrounds there. And I'll show you how to do that. It'll come with a couple of skewers. If you take one of my workshops, you might actually get a needle tool. This is a cookie decorator's best friend, but you can also use these cocktail skewers or anything that you can find with a nice sharp point. These are nice because they're disposable. And you get them in a bag like this. They're under 4 inches long. A toothpick is a little too short, but it does in a pinch. Other tools that you will need: you'll need some scissors. You'll need a cloth or some paper towel damped down. And that's about it. And I always keep water handy in a little container. So let's get started. Okay, we're back, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the icing and get it prepped. Today we're working with these 5 colors. We have a yellow, a white, a nice soft turquoise, sort of a darker teal for the greenery, and a black. If you're making your own, you can do whatever colors you want. This just happens to be the one that I have the collection in. These 4 colors are in an 11-second medium flood consistency icing. If you want to know a little bit more about consistencies, look to the link right up there in the corner of the video, and I will post a little consistency tutorial. The yellow is just a little bit thicker. It's sort of a medium piping consistency, so it's more towards the 15-second mark, 16-second mark, and it's just going to hold its shape a little bit better for us to do some of these details. You will need a pair of scissors in order to prep your piping bags. These are a tipless piping bag. And in order to prep your icing bag, you're going to find the seam. So all these piping bags have a seam in the middle. And you want to make sure it's the top in the middle going straight down. And then you push the icing away. Once that's done, you're going to just pinch off a tiny little bit of the tip. Take your scissors and cut that off. The reason why you want that seam down the middle is because if it's anywhere else and when you're piping, it'll come out more like a ribbon instead of a rope, and that can flip and twist on you and do funny things. Your icing should come out relatively easy and smooth with minimal pressure. So go ahead and prep all your bags now. Find the seam, put it down the top in the middle, push away any icing, pinch off the tip, and cut the tip. Be aware of where your little pieces of plastic go because you don't want those getting into your cookies. I will quite often try and have a little dish or a container to hold these in as well, so that if any icing oozes out while you're decorating, it doesn't get all over your surface. And this is why we keep a cloth on hand. So all your icing should be coming out nice and smooth. If you want a lesson on how to practice some pipe icing, we do that in the workshops, but I will put a link up in the top corner of the video to a practice sheet. So the first cookie we're going to decorate or start decorating on is our little leaf here. So following along on our little guide sheet, if you have one, what we want to do is number one is the cookie shaped like a leaf so that we can get the background on it. We want to glaze a piped background and let that sit as long as possible so we can pipe on top. Now you could do this a couple of different ways. I'm actually going to move my icing aside to my little area here. You could do this a couple of different ways. You can outline your entire cookie and then fill and flood it in. Or we can go for a more rustic look. I'm just going to get some icing down onto the cookie surface. A nice good amount, but not too much. Not enough to flood the entire thing. And you can take the paintbrush. Now this is a food safe paintbrush. You want to make sure you go for something synthetic, never used for crafts, that can be sterilized. Try to avoid any animal hair cookie brushes, or sorry, paintbrushes. And we can just do a simple little glazed background. You can pull that icing around. What this is going to do is it's going to dry a lot quicker for us to decorate on top. And it's going to give us just a slightly more rustic look. So it's perfect for collections that have greenery, or where you kind of want that either vintage or rustic look. And all I'm doing is pulling the icing down over the edge. You can pick up any globs. And I'm almost pulling the brush over the edge so that it gets right to the edge. And you can have your cloth handy. If my cloth looks dirty, it is not. It is very clean and bleached. You just see a lot of food coloring over time. I only use cloths dedicated to my cookie decorating or any cookie stuff. It doesn't have to be perfect because it is going to be a little bit translucent. It is going to keep moving because it is a flood consistency icing. So just let it do its thing. We're going to sit that aside and let that crust over so that we can come back later and decorate on top. So I'm going to just move him aside because we're going to move on to the next rotation of cookies, which is going to be our little bird. And don't put that paintbrush down because we are going to need it. So the next step on the bird is we're going to take that same white and do the exact same technique. And we're going to create this little bottom area here of him. And I'm just going to generally outline it. I'm not even going to do that. I'm just going to generally outline that one line. And I'm going to just get enough icing on. You can see this is very beginner friendly. I'm not doing this overly perfect. I'm just getting the icing on. I'm pushing that icing up against the line. Ooh, my paintbrush. There we go. I'm pushing that blob to get up against that line, and I'm pulling it down over the edge. Now, if you don't have an edible marker and you want to make yourself some guide marks on your cookies, I would suggest investing in an edible marker, but you could take just a little bit of food coloring and thin it down with water and use a paintbrush to draw that line. You can also very sparingly just use a couple of little marks of pencil. It is non-toxic. Just don't want to use too much of it. It is an age-old trick in the baker's world. Okay. So again, we're going for a little more of a rustic look on this collection. If you want a perfect iced look, you can outline this entire tiny little section and flood it. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create some depth and layers. So when we do pipe on, oh, my paintbrush just broke. When we do pipe on sort of this teal and turquoise colors, it's going to sit a little higher than the white, and it's just going to create a little depth. So now we're going to move this one aside. So the next cookie that we are going to do is our little house here. And we want to take our black, and I'm going to show you how to do this. Now, in my workshop or kits, you may also already find this darkened in. And I've just done that with an edible marker. This is great because you can keep the shape a little bit better. If that hasn't been pre-done for you, go ahead and take your black and outline that as best you can. I'm going very, very slow, and fill that in. Now, if you don't want too much icing here and you want that sort of depth that I was talking about with the white, you can just do exactly what we've done with the white on the other last two cookies. Just put enough icing in there to get the coverage. And use your paintbrush to pull it in. You can see I'm just turning the cookie around. And I'm just doing this very carefully because I want to keep an idea of what my circle is. But you could just pull it out and not worry about it. It's already starting to dry up on me. You can just pull it straight out and not worry about that circle so much. And then you can use your little skewer or needle tool to give yourself some guide marks in that circle again. Or if you're doing this at home, you can just use your little cookie cutter and just sharpen up those edges so that you know where you're going to pipe around later. And while we have our black, we are going to outline our roof. If you have the guide marks, you do not have to follow them exactly. And you do not have to worry about going right to the edge of the cookie too if you don't want to. It's okay to have a little bit of naked cookie. And to fill this in, I'm going to just start squeezing up against that line. See how much icing is coming out? I'm squeezing quite hard rather than just outlining. A little blob there. Rather than just outlining, we're actually squeezing icing out. And I'm letting that icing push up against my outline. And go back on the other side if you need to. It depends how you've outlined your roof. I'm just going to use my little needle tool or skewer. And I'm going to just move that icing and reshape it to where I want it to be. Just doing these little, tiny little side whipping motions to pull and push the icing. Try to be careful of not hitting your edge of your cookie and your icing. And the reason why I give 2 skewers to people in these kits is because then you can hold the cookie with one and use the other. To move your icing around. And you can give your cookie just a little shimmy or a shake. And I can tell that my dark icing I mixed was actually for another collection I had. And this is just a little thick. This in your kit or my workshops will be a flood consistency. Today it looks like it's just a little bit thicker. So this should smooth out much better for you. It's also particularly cold in here today, and the temperature will affect your icing. And then we're going to put that one aside as well. That will smooth itself out. Okay. So we are going to come back to our little birdie, and we're going to take our lighter turquoise color, and we're going to outline this whole body section here. You're going to pick the point that's most comfortable for you, but for me, it's going to be right there on the beak, and I'm just going to outline the beak. And you'll be able to immediately see this one is a much thinner icing. I'm going to come down almost over top of that glazed area. Doesn't matter if I have a pre-done outline, because I want to hide any of those inconsistent edges. I'm just cleaning off my bag here a little bit. We're going to outline his head. So you can see you can outline in sections, so you don't have to do the whole thing at once. You can start and stop in order to assess and get comfortable. Touch down, and then I'm going to, right there. I'm going to go in and immediately fill this. I'm going to fill right here first because this is the thinnest section, and my outline is going to crust much faster because it's all, this is going to crust much faster because it's a thinner area is what I'm trying to say. I'm just slowly filling this. Do not worry about any areas that are imperfect. We're going to come back and fix that with your needle tool. You can use your tip to pull back if you blob it somewhere. And if you end up with little bare areas like that or like that, that's fine. Just keep going. You can go back in and fill it a little bit more if you need to, but the icing is going to keep flowing. It's going to keep doing its thing. So let the icing do the work for you. See what it's going to do first. And then go in and fix any edges or any of those areas. Reshape the outside by just doing that little circular motion. If you have sort of layers and bumps and ridges in there, then you'll want to go in and put more icing in. You'll need a little more than you think because icing wants to flow together in order to get that nice, smooth, sort of glassy surface. You can give it a little shimmy shake. You can see how I was talking about doing that painted on thinner glaze for the depth. We have a little bit of a depth going on there, and I love it. Okay. I went a little more green with this set than the blue, but it's still this really pretty color. Okay, we are going to sit him aside and let that crust over. We don't want to do any of the other sections yet because it'll just bleed together. We were able to do it fairly quickly against the white because the white was much thinner of a glaze, and we were able to just kind of let it crust up much faster. But when you have a thicker section like that, it needs a little more time. So we're going to set that aside and move on to other cookies. We're going to come back to our other glazed one, and it should start to look a little matte This one has still some shiny areas, but it will be okay. It's just crusted up enough that we can layer on top and the icing is not going to sink into that too much. Now, you don't have to do leaves exactly like this, but that's the general guide that I'm going to do. I'm going to do 3 at the top and then kind of follow along where I have leaves here. You can take your skewer tool if you're feeling a little hesitant, and you can make yourself a guide mark in that icing where you're going to pipe. You can also do a guide mark where you want leaves. I'm going to offset my leaves just a little bit. Or you can just get straight to piping. So for this one, we're going to use our darker teal color, darker green. And I'm just going to pipe that main stem and make sure. Always wipe your tips in between because you may have clogs. Sometimes there's just a little piece of icing that dries up in the end there. I'm going to just pipe along that guide mark I made. And then I'm going to outline. I'm going to start at the top. I always start in the middle whenever I have a pattern. It just gives me a perspective as to where I want to place things better for patterns. I'm going to just give myself an idea where my leaves are going to go. And then I'm going to outline all of them. So I'm just going up, touching to the top, coming down, and I'm not going to worry about perfection. They are leaves. Leaves are perfectly imperfect in nature. You'll hear me say that a lot. I'm also making sure that I'm not going to start right down at the stem as much as possible. I'm going to try and start up a little bit. And then just connect. And I have a little clog. And you can go over top of your lines, that's fine. But the reason why I'm starting a little bit higher, especially on these bigger leaves, is because when I fill this, it's going to push it down out towards the stem a bit potentially, and I just want a little bit of that definition, if I can keep it. Oh, I got to really check my piping bag here. I keep getting clogs for some reason. So if you have any clogs, all I'm doing is I'm gently pulling out icing, little excess icing. This might be a little piece of hardened icing that didn't get sifted through properly when I was making my icing. All right. So we have our outlines of our leaves. You can turn the cookie if you're more comfortable. And if you have any spots that dripped down or that you weren't as careful when you were painting that glaze on, you can just pick it off now that it's crusted over a little bit. It's easier to do when it crusts over. And I'm going to turn my cookie upside down. You don't have to. This is just visually how I'm able to see it better for the filming. And I'm just going to fill that up nice and full, but not quite. You can see I've left some edge there. And I'm going to use my needle tool to pull it to the edge. And that's going to give me that really nice definition. You can pick and do a couple at a time and then come in with your needle tool. I'm going to pull it down to anywhere I didn't have facing right to the edge. And you can reshape your leaf then too. Like if you want a little bit of a pointier leaf, pull that icing out. You'll have a little on your tip that you need to wipe off. Icing always gives me the sniffles. And you can see that white glaze that we had underneath is letting us ice on top of it. If you did a full flooded section, You would have to let it really crust over or put it in a dehydrator in order to let us do this. Otherwise, that green is going to sink down and melt with the white. If you don't like your leaf shapes, or you don't like your placements, or if you have extra negative space that you like or too close together, don't stress about that, because we're going to be adding berries and details later, and you can always just change it up with the next layer. I always tell people, leave the cookie as you've planned it in that moment, and then come back and see how you like it, or can change it up with the next step. Now with that, you could see I wanted a little bit of a different shape on my leaf, so I actually just pushed out. Be very, very careful where you're touching your cookie. You can see I'm just pushing that icing out with those little motions, and I'm reshaping it. So once we're done these, we're going to leave them before we come back and add details later. We're going to move on to the next cookie. You can give your cookie a little shimmy if you need to, but you can tell we're working with that nice flood icing so it levels itself out and smooths itself out. So we're going to set him aside. And we are going to come back to our house. Now, remember I said my black icing was just a little thicker than it should be. It should have been a flood, and it wasn't. We're going to keep going. Yours will be a flood icing. But what we're going to do is we're going to take that lighter teal color, and we're going to do the bulk of the house. But you'll also want your white on hand, because we're going to go right in after, and we're going to put some little polka dots into the icing. So I'm going to just outline the edge of my house. And you can leave a little bit of an edge if you want to. You do not have to go right to the edge. It saves you from flowing over the edge if when you flood it. And I'm going to outline, I'm going to clean off my tip in between, and I'm going to outline my circle. Just go really slow with this. It doesn't have to be perfect, because we're going to add details after. But if you have a really wonky line, just come around the outside edge of it and flood a little more and push that in. Now you can outline the roof if you want to. Or you can just go right in and start flooding. And I'm actually going away from the edge and letting that icing push up against the roof. I'll show you on this side because it doesn't have any lines. So you can see, where's my needle tool? You can see this is about as far as I want to be. Almost here, there's a line. That's where I'm pushing, flooding and pushing, letting it push against there. Stuttering on my words today. Now don't worry about if you see edges like that that are bare. The icing is going to keep moving and it's going to keep flowing. And when I come in with icing over here, it's also going to start pushing that up a bit too. You do want to work quickly enough to get this filled, and so that we can get the white dots in there. But take your time to do it right. And you can do it in sections. You can go around and around, or you can just pick a whole section. Like I'm just going to fill this whole section You're going to find what's comfortable for you. And turn your cookie because you'll be able to see areas that you didn't see from one angle. I realized I did not get all along my outline here. Ooh, the light above me is playing havoc with shadows on this color. And if you don't like your outline where you flooded against the roof, that's okay. You can fix it a little bit like this. Again, I'm just doing tiny little whipping motions, just very, very short whipping motions, and I'm pulling and pushing the icing while I'm moving. And you can do that along the edge. But we're also going to come in after, and you can pipe added details on top to hide any edges that you don't like. Same with your circle. Circles are hard. I'm not going to lie. They're really tough to get perfect. So don't get frustrated with yourself if it's not coming out perfect. I'm going to show you how to hide that after. I'm not going to fuss with it too much. I'm just going to let it rest and sit. And I'm going to move this cookie aside. For you, I would recommend just sliding aside. I am actually just putting them on a tray right here beside me. But you actually don't want to lift them too much because you can crack the surface if it starts to dry on the surface. It's really fluid underneath still. So if you can, just slide your cookie over. Oh, bring it back. Don't put it away. Bring it back. Also, the more you move them, the more likely you are to knock them. And come back with your white. And I'm going to put polka dots right into this icing. This is a step you don't have to do. It's optional. But I'm going to start in the middle at the top. And I'm just going to touch that icing to the surface, right actually into the surface a little bit. Now, to do tiny little dots, I'm going to show you with another color because I'm working on a white surface. To do tiny little dots, I am just squeezing just a little bit of the tip, and I'm touching that. If you try and get to your surface and squeeze, you're going to end up with a much bigger dot, but also in the wet icing, it's going to spread out and become even bigger. So I'm just letting a little bit of that come out, and I'm touching it into the surface. Now, to do the best polka dot pattern, I did, about 5 dots down the middle. And then I came beside it, and I'm doing another row, and I'm going to do another row and another row, but I'm going in between those ones. And then when I do the next row, I'm going to go in between those ones. You could just put polka dots wherever you want. It doesn't matter. And where the pattern is a little bit askew because of that round opening, just take a guess. Just barely squeezing tiny little dots, and I'm working in rows. I'm pushing that right into the icing. This is a wet on wet technique, so it should sink into the icing and become a thin little surface, a smooth little surface. If you have any sort of sitting on top, you can just tap them in. But remember, the icing is wet and it's going to keep working, so let it work for you. Now, when I did this collection originally, I went back in and did the dots after. This was for a little bit of a different lesson. So this one is more of a knobby, kind of knob and nail vase type texture. You can wait till this crests over and do that as well, but I like the wet on wet. And we're going to let that sit now. Now you can sit this aside. Okay. We're going to come back to our bird, who I just mucked because I'm moving him around too much. So, like I said, normally I wouldn't pick them up and move them. I would just slide them around, and I would try to get used to doing it with my needle tools. So this should be crusted up just enough around the edging that I can go in and do his wing. We're going to do his wing in that darker color. And how I'm going to do this is I'm going to just connect it to where his body is and outline the tip of his tail. Yeah, I really mucked up my little. If you mucked up, I'm going to try and show you. If you muck it up anywhere, when it's crusted but still a little damp, you can add just a touch more icing, and I mean just a touch. Let that kind of connect with the icing and melt it back down where it's crusty, and tap it, and just like you're doing little stitches. And it should pick up the wet icing underneath, melt that crustiness just a bit, and blend together as best you can. Okay, so coming back to our wing. And I'm going to just see how slow I'm working with that flooding. I'm just going to push. I can see I dropped a tiny little crumb right there. I'm going to push that icing out. These colors turned out way more green than I did blue this time. When you're making icing, colors keep blooming, and I did this icing yesterday morning. And your colors will shift and change over time, so always go a little lighter on the food coloring that you think you'll need for color. And let it sit. The green is almost bang on. Once it dries, it'll get darker like this. Colors also get darker over time. And if you don't like your edges, like I want to come a little bit more out on my edge there, so I'm just going to do that little motion. The colors get darker over time, and the color keeps blooming. So I quite often try and mix my colors a day before, if I can. Let them sit overnight and kind of see what color develops. Okay, so we're going to sit our little birdie aside. I'm going to stop putting them on my tray. I'm just going to move them over. Okay. And you can take a moment at any point to clean up your surface and organize your icing bags. But we're going to be working on our leaf stem again. So now that this is crusted up a little bit, I want to just add a little texture on the leaves. If you like your leaves the way they are, feel free to leave them. I've got icing everywhere. But I'm just going to create an extra little thickness on my line. Depends how confident you're feeling. And I'm going to come straight up over my leaf. And I'm just going to create that little kind of vein. And I'm not piping all the way across. I'm actually releasing my pressure now, and I'm pulling that icing down to the tip. Otherwise, you're going to end up with that, or blobbing on your cookie. So practice just squeezing, piping, and then releasing and pulling the icing to where you want it to go. If it is a fluid flood icing like this, it'll have some stretch to it. If it is a thicker icing, it'll break a little bit easier. But there, we've created some texture. And again, we're going to sit him aside. And let him rest before we put on those berries. We're going to come back to our house. Cleaning off my cloth a little bit here. We're going to come back to the house. And we're going to add some greenery here. So just to show you, we're going to have like a little greenery stem. And you don't have to add this if in this way. You could do it on the other side if you like. You can do just a short little one. But all I've done is picked a point that I like, and I'm going to kind of just create a curved little line here. I'm leaving enough room for leaves on either side. And unlike the stem that we did, where we outlined the individual leaves, these are much smaller and it's harder to outline. So instead of, I'm going to show an example here. Instead of outlining a leaf and then filling it in, what we're going to do is we're going to pick a point and I'm going to squeeze a nice little ball, almost like we're filling a leaf. And then I'm just going to pull the tip of my needle tool through that to create a leaf. And then I'm going to do it here as well. Now you can use your piping bag to pull that tip as well. And as long as you have enough icing in the bulk of that bulb to work with, you can pull it out into a leaf shape. And if you want to draw it out even further, just go deeper and pull longer. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to pick some spots that I want leaves. I'm not going to start on the very end because I went right up near the roof. I'm just going to pick a couple of spots. And I'm only going to aim for about 4 or 5 leaves. I'm going to start with 4 and see where I'm at. I'm going to do that bulb. And I'm going to draw that out. What we're going to be careful of is not drawing down into the icing underneath it. You don't want to catch that too much. And leaves go every which way, so you can feel free to make them go different directions. They can go upwards, they can go a little bit downwards if you want. You want an organic feel. Now I feel like 4 is not quite right, so I'm going to put 1 right here. But I'm going to be very, very careful of this one. I didn't want to start the bulb right here because it will bleed into that other one. So I started the bulb up here. All right, so we got some greenery down, and we're going to let that rest before we put berries on. If you can come out to one of my workshops and you live locally, I'm in Vernon, British Columbia, honestly, you'll get a lot more out of it. We can do a lot of one-on-one, and I get to watch each participant and help them through different challenges that each person might have. But these kits are a fun way to just do it at home as well. Okay, we're going to come back to our bird. Now, I'm still mucking it up. It's really hard to see around the camera and all the equipment here. Okay, so we're going to put his little beak on. And this is just such a small little section that you can kind of do like what we were doing with the leaves. You can just create like almost like a nice little bulb. And then pull out the tip. And you can reshape it if you need to, that little circular motion. Just work slowly and diligently. And you have his little beak. Now, while we have the yellow on hand, we're going to come in and do our berries. And I'm going to pick just a couple of spots. You can see here I've done 3, 2, and 1. Working in offset numbers is generally a really good design tip. But again, I like to start in the middle or at the top in the middle on any pattern I do. This is free. You can do wherever you want. You can kind of make little guide marks where you might want to see berries. Just visually, it helps you as you're filling them out, because if you get them too close together, they start bleeding together. So you want to separate them. And I'm just going to squeeze a nice little dot. So all I'm doing is I'm going more upright, up, down, and upright. I'm holding my tip right close to the surface, and I'm squeezing, and I'm then releasing my icing and pulling that away. And that's going to let the icing bloom up around the tip. If you have any little peaks, just touch them down. And then you can see I've separated all these, so I'm going to go nice and separate so they don't blend together as one blob. And you can make the berries as big or as little as you want. I'm going to do 2 on the bottom and then 1 at the top. Touch down any little peaks you have. And then your leaf is actually done. That is it. If you don't like it, wait till you see it in the whole collection and then decide if you want to add anything to it. But we are just going to set him aside. And then we're going to come back and just add the same little dots, but even smaller. Just a couple. To this little stem on your birdhouse. Just starts tying the whole thing together. Okay. So we're still going to let this set a little bit more before we do any more details to finish him up. And we're going to come back to our little birdie. And we're going to add his eye and some lines or details on his wings. You can see here, you can do whatever patterns you want, whatever colors you want. Before the eye, I'm just going to practice that little dot. And if you want a little reflection in it, you can. You can just leave it black if you want. You could also just drop a little sprinkle in there if you have black bead sprinkles. You could add just a tiny little bit of white for a little reflection. And you can you can just do a little dot if you want to and pull it out through there. Just gives a little life to him. I'm going to take my lighter green, lighter turquoise, and I'm just going to, from his tail down somewhere along his wing. I'm not going to go all the way to the edge. I'm going to pipe a line. I'm going to do that here as well, near the bottom. And you can go the opposite way if it's more comfortable for you. And if your icing is all connecting together a little too much, you can just drag your needle tool through it. Just make sure you don't drag it through the actual darker wing that you did. And in white, I'm going to add some little dot details. These ones I kind of want a little just sit on top, which is why I let it crust over. But if you wanted a wet on wet like we did here in the house, you could have done this right away. And again, I'm just barely squeezing out and letting it touch the surface. And it's never going to be exactly the same as the sample. I placed my lines here. I got 4 lines. My wing was a little bit bigger. You just kind of work with what you can visually see on your own cookie and how you like it. And then your little birdie is done. So we're going to come back in and we're going to finish our house. A little space for him to live. And in order to finish him up, I'm going to look at it and decide anywhere that I didn't like how my icing connected with the roof. And I'm going to just outline that and give a little definition to that edge. You can also add additional lines to the roof. I don't know how well this is going to show on the camera with this lighting on it, but it kind of hides any of those indiscrepancies and gives a little texture. And around the opening, remember I said don't worry about that opening so much if you didn't like it. We're going to go in and do those tiny little dots that we've been practicing. So again, tiny little dots, but this time instead of upright and like this where you wanted to bloom that icing, you get a lot out, I'm just going to be working a little bit on the edge because I'm going to work around the edge here to create little dots. So almost on the black, right where it connects, I'm going to create a little dot. I'm going to step away from it distance-wise. I don't know how well you can see this, but I'll show you. I just outline myself a little circle with my marker. Well, let's try that again. Okay. So what I'm doing with that circle is I'm coming just on the inside. I'm squeezing a little dot, and then I'm almost leaving the space of one whole dot in between. And then just working around. The reason why I'm leaving that spacing is because this icing is very fluid, and if you don't, you come in and go right beside it, you lose definition, and what happens is that's all going to start bleeding together, and you're not going to see little dots. You're going to see sort of a blobby, wormy, squiggly line. Okay. So just work slowly all around and turn the cookie if you need to. Again, I'm working a little bit more on an angle and kind of pushing in. But these little dots, see that is a wonky area. You can start kind of going on top of the icing a bit to reshape that circle. All these details on top that you can add later help you push the eye to see what you want it to see rather than what you've actually done to decorate underneath. All right. Now we're going to look at our collection and see if there's any details that we want to add. If you want to do any additional outlines, you can do additional outlines. If you don't like, say the outline of your house, you can go through and give a couple lines. And I don't even care if it broke a little bit here because I'm just kind of doing almost like that sketch look just to lead the eye, just like what I was talking about with the dots, is you're just trying to add a detail on top to lead the eye to see what you want it to see instead of the details underneath. And there's your collection. You guys did it. A little bit of a different color set than this one. Which one do you like better? I hope you guys had fun. I hope you try another tutorial or another kit or another workshop. Give yourselves a round of applause. You did really well, I'm sure. Feel free to post any photos on Instagram or Facebook and tag me in at sugarbeecookies. We'll see you all soon.